Hey Frank, thanks for joining me today. It's great to have you with us today.
Julian.
Before we get on around the questioning, could I just maybe ask you to tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a financial advisor, a certified financial advisor. I've been in the financial, personal planning business for over 10 years now, over a decade now, I have to say. So my background is from accounting, but my real passion is to help people find out the right strategies to build their wealth, and not just their wealth, the wealth for the next generations. And
Hmm.
along the way, what are the most tax effective way and the quickest way to get there? That's sort of my job, to help people achieve that.
No, excellent. Yes, more reports and obviously our interactions together. You're doing a fantastic job of that.
Thank you.
So Frank, just I thought I'd ask a few questions just to help our audience here understand a little bit more around,
Yeah.
I guess, the nature of general financial planning, and then we'll get a bit more specific around the area that we're seeing a huge growth in is SMSF,
Yes.
investing into property. So I
Mhm.
guess first, let's start with what are the most common financial mistakes you see people make, and how do you help them avoid or correct those mistakes?
Well, that's a really good question. Often when we're sitting down and having a chat with our clients or potential clients, and we're starting to, do some mental assessment to see, okay, is this client going to be pretty successful with their wealth, or has they already been quite successful? And what are the reasons behind this? I have to say there are a lot of things that needs to put into consideration, but some of the things are pretty, subtle. When you look back and you're not really paying too much attention of it. One is they're not really aware of these kind of costs associated with making mistakes, and also the cost of their time. So these are really important costs where, if you make a mistake and that could actually stop you from growing your wealth, for another couple of years, or delaying the time when you achieve your goal. That's one thing that people often, really not put into consideration. Another mistake I really see is a lot of people, um, they're experts in their own field, but they don't really have. I think that's not because of their problem. It's the education system. They don't have like a helicopter view to see where my wealth journey could be. Right. So someone sitting here, and if I ask them, like, if pretending I'm not here, and just tell me, we just go with the flow, go with whatever you're doing, where are you going to be in another 5, 10 years time? So we often get these kind of questions when you're finding your first job, right? Where you see yourself in 5 years, in
Yeah.
this job. But we often don't ask these questions to see where are you going to see yourself, your wealth accumulation in about 5, 10 years time, if you're doing nothing or if you're doing something. So we don't really ask that kind of questions ourselves. Like, there's a lot of things evolved around how not to make a mistake, because if you don't know these are mistakes, then you're going to go ahead and make it. You don't have a bigger picture. You're going to make decisions emotionally. You see something that is really nice and beautiful, you're just going to take out your credit card and buy it. You see a property with a nice view, but it's overpriced. You go there and you buy it, sign the contract. So you could make a lot of mistakes, which, it's going to take years to really to fix them. And other than that, I think a lot of people are not really consulting to get expert advice before they go make any kinds of decision. I think that's another mistake that they make.
Mhm.
They really couldn't quantify if they pay for a professional service versus the benefit that they can get, because something that are much more tangible immediately, but something that are more intangible over the long term. For example, the mistakes that they make over another 10, 15 years when they're starting to realize they need to pay a huge money, a tax on capital gain, things like that. So if I could sum it up in 3 points, one is to understand that their time is also money. If they make a mistake, that's going to stop them from getting there. That's also a cost to them. If they can realize that, that's a plus. Second is, wherever you are, you need to understand where you're going to go. A lot of people don't understand that. And third really is to seek professional advice before you make any kinds of decisions first.
Yeah, no, wonderful. Great tips and insights. And yeah, one of the terms we often use is, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And
Yeah,
hence the
exactly.
strategic advice that you offer long-term and short-term is really, really important.
Absolutely.
Furthermore, onto that, in talking about how do you tailor financial plans to accommodate the different risk profiles of your clients and even their life stages of where they're at in their lives?
Well, when I saw this question, I think that is a very interesting question because we actually delved into risk tolerances, these words, very deeply, just to understand how people perceive risk. Give you an example. If someone just invested into a stock market and all in a sudden the stock market crashed, and or someone invested in the stock market and all in a sudden it doubled, tripled in value, this person will have a very different view versus risk, because risk is a very, I wouldn't say emotional, but it's a very subjective view, how we really see what risk is. And it's all based on our past or immediate experiences of our financial decisions made. So when we look about risk tolerances, it's pretty difficult. We really need to dive in deep to understand the emotional aspect of how they really see things are moving and how they react to it. So let's just put that aside. Life stage is much easier to sort of like grasp, in that kind of, where you're at, right? If you're a young family, if you're a wealth accumulator, or if you're approaching to retirement. So we tend to start with life stages. I always say I'm a life stage planning advisor. So when we look at life stages, these milestones or these tick boxes tends to be more obvious and it's easier to identify. So for people who are approaching retirement, there are some immediate needs. For example, they stopped working and they need to have their asset to pumping cash flow for them. So that is very different to people who are just starting to accumulate their wealth or starting to buying into certain assets. So when people are actually seeking different outcomes of a particular asset, then we need to have a different planning approach for them to understand what exactly is the outcome that we're seeking. Some people ask me, like, well, I have people in their 30s say, look, I just got money from my grandparents. Should I just pay off my home loan? That is a really good question. People ask me, oh, should I just reduce my debt? Then the question really is, why are you taking up the debt initially? And why you're carrying on your debt? And why you're reducing your debt? What is the motivation behind this? And if we delve in deeper, then we realize, okay, this person's goal really is to build up an asset portfolio to a certain, $1 million. And by paying off the debt, it's not going to help him to do that because he needs to have more leverage to be able to achieve that. Then it gets to be more clearer as how we can make our own financial decision. So when we tailoring our financial plans, we tend to look at these nuances, exactly where they want it to be, or how they feel comfortable doing or making these financial decisions and getting these outcomes. By understanding their emotional and also financial objectives, then it would be much easier to tailor the plan for them. Hopefully that's not too conceptual. It's very real to everyone. And a lot of clients ask me, oh, Frank, do you have clients in a similar situation that we've done the similar thing? I said, look, I spoke to maybe 1,000 clients a year, but we're never seeing anyone's exactly the same. It's very hard to say. We have some guidelines to identify where you want to be, but it's, everyone's plan is different. That's the reason why we have to tailor plan for everyone.
Yeah, no, great point. A particular part about, everyone's plans are different. It's exactly the same terms. And a lot of times we get prospects coming in saying, what deals do you have? So, well, hang on, everyone's different. We don't hold stock. Everyone has a slightly different risk profile, where they want to lead. Let's look at the long-term plan, buy and hold strategies, whether it's you want to do some development, you want to manufacture growth. And so I think it's really important to do an individual approach as opposed to a mass market approach, which we do see a lot in financial planning and property buying as well.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
If we stick on that risk side and integrate that into property, so what specific advice do you have for your clients who are heavily invested in real estate property, considering the current market conditions we're at and also their long-term stability in affording potential negative gearing aspects?
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. So first of all, I don't see a lot of advisors really delve into property planning or property investment purely because they're not real estate agents or buyer agents. They sometimes have no benefit of advising clients getting to these kind of strategies. But for me, I'm pretty different to other advisors how they look at this. We really look at the life stage. We really look at the planning strategies. So when we look at the property planning, we often have clients having maybe even 10 properties came to us and look at the whole portfolio and the assets. Frank, can you give me some advice? So for us, it's very, very difficult to pinpoint any specific property and comment on that and say, look, this property is in Queensland, this property is a 3-bedroom, the land size. We really can't comment on any of this saying this property is going to go up in value, because that's not our job. But what we really look at is from an asset succession point of view, are these properties in the right structure to be passed on to the next generation, or what are their plans towards these properties? And are these properties generating sufficient cash flow if they're in retirement, or if they're actually performing versus other equivalent assets, let's say shares or other investments? Are there also alternatives that they can potentially consider versus just simply staying in property? So we opened up their sort of like options in front of them, and also get the horizon a little bit bigger, right? They see the whole picture of, other than the property, what can I do? Because they've probably been a professional investor for many, many years, and they want some advice on that. Another thing is with the tax. If they're starting to sell these properties or not selling these properties, they're going to see some implications with their own personal tax. And some professional investors set up the structures initially, get it done properly with an accountant. And when we look at that, we can give them confirmation, say you're on the right path. Everything's done. We really can't do any better than that. But with respect to the property market and the going up and downs with the property price, often what we see is we want to pull them back to reality. Is what's the nature of a property, right? First of all, we all understand property is there to hedge inflation. We've been told when we're in primary school or when whatever, that's the first role for property, right? To being there, because everything's going up in value, construction cost is going up. But other than that, there are supply and demand that is play as a role to change the property price, and also government policies. So we often talk to the client that you need to be prepared that there could be a surge when there are more people coming in, but the value could going flat or stagnant for a relatively long period of time. If they just all in a sudden shut the immigration gate, and there's less people coming to Australia, and you're going to have to face the reality there's not going to be enough people. Probably not going to happen immediately, but if that happens, that's going to impact property. And third is, like in Victoria, when they're starting to introduce different kinds of tax laws, that's going to impact how people perceive investing into properties. So a lot of things are in play that could potentially impact the outcome of investing into a whole property portfolio. So these are the things, other than picking in the right suburb, the right property, that we need to put into consideration. I mean, by having that kind of more of a macro view of how everything works, that would really help them to set the right expectation. I mean, a lot of things is all about expectations, right? When they have the right expectations, it's much easier to accept a less superior outcome. And that's how I put it that way. So it's important to not just focusing on one specific asset, but have a bigger picture, as I mentioned earlier, to see where I'm going to go, and also how we're going to pass the asset to the next generation. Another very interesting topic you mentioned, negative gearing. I know a lot of people talking about negative gearing, and there are strategies built around it, for I don't know how many years, ever since I became decade ago, right? That absolutely worked in that period of time when the property was going up crazy, and also you have brand new apartments built for negative gearings. I mean, negative gearing is something that you can play, but you have to play very carefully. And often what we do together with the accountant is we need to put in a scenario is, if we go negative gearing versus if we don't go negative gearing, what are the differences? Because in the end, you're going to have to pay it back as a capital gain tax, and how much benefit you can get before you make that decision. So if you step into that kind of a scenario comparison, and everything's starting to make sense, instead of the clients are saying, okay, I'm going to pay a huge tax bill the moment that we sell the property, then they're all prepared. They know that's going to be a huge tax bill when we have these all kind of cash flow improvements along the way, and it helps you to accumulate more properties along the way. So as I said again, it's all about expectation. If we get the calculations done right, we set the right expectation, we accept less than superior outcome, then everything's going to be good, and we're going to be on track to get where we want to be.
Yeah, no, great advice and great tips, particularly that macro element, which is what we love to do in property as well, but also then giving them that, you mentioned the word generational aspect as well, and people don't really think that far ahead. We get people who we land bank for clients. We buy good areas of land or areas that we can develop, and they might not look at that for 20 years. They'll actually pass it on to someone potentially at that stage. So it is really good advice to look at that long-term aspect, not just looking at the short term, or even go back to short term. We see people wanting to buy properties. So yeah, and we'll want a capital growth strategy, and then we're going to sell it in 5 years. Then why are you going to sell it in 5 years? They haven't actually thought about the why. And they don't understand the capital growth implications, the tax implications. So it's really great that you give such a holistic advice across that. I guess moving on into strategies now, what sort of strategy do you recommend when incorporating investment properties into a financial plan? Are there any market conditions where you advise against investing in property using from a financial planning aspect, or even in other avenues in superannuation?
I mean, properties definitely has its role to play in the overall wealth accumulation strategy. And luckily, we're in Australia. So if we're in a different country, probably it's an entirely different scenario when we look at strategies. But because it has its role to play, it's really hard to ignore why we're not investing into properties. But it is a matter of how we really leverage expertise like yourself to get the thing done right. That's what we see the biggest problem, because people get into properties, they might get like off the plan. They're really not thinking what they were doing, and then all in a sudden they're all in a huge debt, and the transaction cost is huge for them. And if they want to make some adjustment to sell maybe 2 properties and buy another one, that's going to be very costly, and that's going to impact their daily living cost or the money that they're saved in the bank account. So not a lot of people having that kind of space for maneuvering around their portfolio. So I think that's the hardest part, especially when you didn't get it done right in the first place. And I would strongly encourage you, if anyone wanted to get into property, make sure you get it done right. And when I say get it done right, also it's about not just the profiting out of the property, it's about the tax implications, right? So in Australia, we have different ownerships. We can have property owned by individual, by company, by a family trust, a trust, or by a superannuation fund. So each of these entities will have different tax consequences. But in saying that, is there anyone better than the other one? It's very hard to say anyone is better than the other one. It's just every different entity has its own user implication. And in a specific scenario for client wanting to have maybe high cash flow, less ongoing maintenance, long-term wealth growth, self-managed super fund might be a good way for them to look into, because the moment when they get into retirement, move into pension, at a certain amount, they will be able to benefit the 0% tax, which is, there's nowhere else in Australia you can find something like that. Yeah. And it's important because these are like small baby steps that you're taking along the way, and you're not going to see any immediate return in a really relatively short period of time, like let's say 3-5 years. You're not going to see it. But over that period of time, you will say, okay, when you look back, you will be so happy that you actually took the action and put all these things in place. Because when you're wanting to take an action and probably buy another one, it's going to be a lot harder, because the time has a cost, as I mentioned earlier. If you're not in there, you didn't spend the time investing there, then you're going to have to pay the cost for that, or opportunity cost for that. So that's something that needs to be put into consideration. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's
to
perfect.
The point.
Yeah. No, it's just to get that feel on what other considerations should take into their plans. I guess sticking with that the thread of self-managed super funds, as you touched upon, can you discuss the process of setting up an SMSF for property investment? What are the considerations that they must look at? And how can the SMS be used effectively in a broader investment strategy?
Absolutely. So self-managed super fund is not a new term. I believe like probably 10 years ago, it was called like DIY super. It has the old name DIY super, then you moved on to self-managed super fund. So you really have to be in this business long enough to know all these different names. But for self-managed super fund, it has changed not a lot, but small changes. Originally, you wouldn't allow up to 6 members. Now you can have 6 members. What that really means is you can have 3 generations all in the same fund.
Right.
But that adds the complexity as how you're going to run the fund, because everyone has different objectives. The older generation, the seniors might wanting to retire or already in retirement. The wealth accumulators, starting to buy into more or leverage more. The younger generation is probably just getting to the workforce. So there are a lot of things that needs to put in consideration especially when you have so many 6 members in the fund. But self-managed super fund, when we look at from a planning perspective, how that's going to excel, any other entities when we look at, is because it really disciplines you. Sometimes when you purchase something, you want to buy and sell, and you're gonna have to. You probably take profit and say, look, I will just buy a nice car if I want to, right? So it really disciplines you, because everything has to be sort of like a quarantined in that container and used only for investment purposes. So when people are looking to buy a property inside a self-managed super fund, what we often see is they probably talk to their accountant and say, look, I spoke to an agent, I looked at property and it's really nice. I just want to set it up. Can we do that? And the accountant will probably, I don't know, like the accountant would probably say yes or no. Sometimes the accountant would give advice, sometimes the accountant wouldn't. But 99% nowadays, the accountants are trying to avoid giving any advice in regards to, you should set up a self-managed super fund, because there's a lot of implications of setting up the self-managed super fund, which the accountant is probably not aware of. Yeah. So the right process is, first of all, the person needs to sit down with an advisor to understand what exactly is a self-managed super fund, to do a proper assessment, we call a feasibility test, to see if you are fit to run a self-managed super fund. Do you have the capacity to do it? That's one thing. And second thing is, what exactly is your strategy? You set it up, you say you want to buy a property, and when you go ahead and buy a property, what exactly is the property you want to purchase? Because you put your pretty much life savings for one single asset. From a tax office perspective, that's pretty risky, right? So you bet everything. It's like you go to casino, you bet everything on one single number, and that's going to be pretty risky. And how are you going to mitigate that? You're going to have a checklist of these kind of risks that you wanted to mitigate. You probably need to back it up with numbers, with researches, and with process to make sure that everything's going to be done and a proper result can be delivered. I don't think an accountant would be able to help you do that, because that's pretty much your job. And an accountant assumed that you would do that. And you assume that the accountant would know that you would do that. There are always situations like that. And the next step really is you need to understand the different options. One is we go ahead and purchase a property, right? We often do modelings for clients. And so look, if we go ahead and you go ahead and purchase that value of property and with that level of return versus you not doing that, what are going to be the differences? And we often see that there's going to be a huge difference if the return is different, but we can see there are some variables that plays in, and that that we will put the variables in that could significantly change the outcome. One being if there's a very high maintenance cost, or if the sudden increase of interest rate. These are the things that could pretty much jeopardize the whole plan, and that could come out as at a less superior outcome versus if you're just living in the industry fund. I mean, these are all setting the right expectation for the client, that they put into consideration that we understand the risk of doing this. And once these are all done, then we need to spit out all the cost, to get these things done. The setup cost, the accountant's cost, the ongoing maintenance cost, how this is gonna impact your balance, and is your balance enough to get it up and running? So the ATO has a guideline of 200K, but we find it 200K is a bit stretched. Yeah. And we actually look at to have a higher balance to be able to do a proper strategy for the client. And then we need to look at diversification, risk mitigation, like in case if someone passed away, how are you going to pass on the asset? Or, when you get into retirement, how are you going to deal with these assets? Or there are things like, when you wanted to have some diversification, how you're going to manage with your employer contribution. I don't think any of these topics are going to be discussed by an accountant. And people are thinking, oh, I just need an accountant to get it done. Because the accountant assumed that you would consider everything. But I would say 99% of people wouldn't have the knowledge and the experience to do that. And it's going to be costly if they don't do it right. So the first step is to get the advisor, draft the plan, everything black and white, write it down, and you approve the plan, explain the plan, understand the plan, approve the plan. It's like an architectural drawing, and we need to get down to the engineering level. And then we move it forward to the accountant. The accountant can set the whole thing up. We get the bank account opened, get the money coming in. And also at the same time, the lending specialist would get the loan ready for you. This is the time where someone can start looking for a property. And we often see this is happening in the wrong order. Someone already seeing a property and put in a deposit. They don't even know what the entities to put on the contract, but they already put in the deposit. And now they're coming back to the accountant and say, look, we need to have a self-managed super fund, and talk to the broker, get me a loan tomorrow, which isn't the right approach. And there are chances that you might not be able to secure the property, or you might pay extra cost, for things to go wrong. So these are basically the approach of setting up the self-managed super fund, get it up and running, and purchase a property, and making sure that you understand the pros and cons and all the risk associated with it.
No, it's a great review, and we've seen over the years, particularly a few years back, where we've had someone who's either used a cheap online process of setting up a super fund, and then we get caught out in the back end when we get to the buying stage because the entity name is wrong, and as you know, it's very hard to unwind once you make mistakes in trust, anything in the financial sector. So it's really important to pay for good advice, and we often say to all our clients, it's about building your team of experts, and that starts with a financial planner to set up that plan, an accountant, obviously a great mortgage broker who can assist you with your finances throughout a long period of time, and setting up the strategy that you would say put together from a financial plan. And then, do you look at a buyer's agent, a buyer's advocate to help you execute those plans around strategy, around the property strategy? So the final question is, how do you balance the need for diversification within an SMSF fund, particularly when a significant portion of the fund is invested in property?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because when we look at assets, right, we're just purely looking at the asset, the nature of these assets, and we wanted to help our clients understand that the different assets have different natures. One thing that I always say, that for property is not like Woolworths that is making profit every day, right? So some entity has hired the labor and producing values along the way as a business, but for properties is predominantly controlled by the supply and demand, and also inflation, all kinds of monetary policies. So the logic behind the value growth is very different to properties versus other, maybe stocks and other assets. So diversification really is to have your finger tapped on to different ways of making money. That's how we really look at this. Why we need to diversify, because people think, oh, share market is so volatile and it's going up and down. So look, if you go ahead and price your property every day, you're gonna see volatility there, and it's just, you can't really sell it or buy it immediately, but shares can. So when we look at diversification, if we could help our clients to understand where exactly they want to diversify. We have clients who are particularly interested in say, look, I just want to get into the banks and getting all the dividends. We just feel like these are more conservative approach for us. And is that something that can be done? Absolutely. When the investment properties are pumping rental yield, these rents coming out, you could either try to pay off the debt, or if you're comfortable have the debt to last for that long, you could use diversification to diversify into other assets, and use your employer contribution to do other investment as well.